Well, well, well. They didn't just gossip about you, they opened a case file. They didn't just talk, they took notes. Whole teams were assembled, quiet rooms were reserved, blinds were shut, and the name on every document was yours. You, the outlier, the variable that broke the equation. And when the reports started rolling in, when the witnesses began to speak, something happened that no one could explain. Every testimony, every recollection, every account from every corner of your past aligned. It wasn't coordinated, it was cosmic. Because when truth is undeniable, it repeats itself through every tongue that tries to twist it. They called people from your schools, your jobs, your cities. They cross-checked dates, compared behaviors, analyzed patterns, and yet every description they received didn't contradict. It converged. They said the same thing, the same unsettling truth that's been haunting rooms since your name first appeared on their radar. That one's different. That one doesn't play by our rules. They asked, "What do you mean different?" And the answers weren't scripted. They were shaken out of people like confessions. They don't react like normal people. They can't be manipulated. It's like they see through you. It's like they already know the ending. Every voice carried the same tremor, fear wrapped in fascination. The investigators kept thinking there had to be exaggeration in there somewhere. But no matter who they interviewed, no matter what side of your life they pulled from, they kept finding the same impossible consistency. It's as if every person who ever crossed paths with you was describing the same phenomenon through different metaphors. Some called it power, others called it prophecy. Some said it was presence, others said it was possession. But no one said ordinary. The deeper they dug, the more it looked less like a human profile and more like a pattern of divine interference. You became less of a person in their reports and more of a phenomenon, an occurrence that bends probability. They replayed footage, cross-referenced communications, ran your digital footprint through psychological models, and the data rebelled. Algorithms couldn't chart your reactions. Predictive models glitched. You were unpredictable, not because you were chaotic, but because you were conscious. The kind of consciousness that doesn't operate from survival, it operates from strategy. And that terrified them. Because people like you don't panic under pressure, you perform. You don't seek approval, you study responses. Every move you make is an experiment that turns spectators into subjects. By the third week of their investigation, patterns began to surface. Patterns not about your behavior, but about theirs. The investigators were starting to shift. They'd come in confident, skeptical, detached. But after days of reviewing stories, after nights of watching your interviews, your posts, your expressions, they began to develop the same symptoms as everyone else who's ever encountered you. Unease, fixation, self-reflection. You were the mirror they didn't mean to look into. The project wasn't about you anymore. It was about what you revealed in them. They'd ask each other, "Why do I feel like they're watching me through the screen? Why do I feel exposed reading this?" It wasn't paranoia. It was awareness catching up. Because your energy doesn't just walk into rooms, it rearranges hierarchies. It redefines what power feels like. It isn't loud, it's surgical. It doesn't demand attention, it magnetizes it. And when authority figures can't explain charisma, they call it threat. When control structures can't predict consciousness, they call it danger. You weren't being investigated for crimes. You were being studied for calibration. They wanted to understand how one individual could remain composed while the rest collapse under pressure. They wanted to decode how you managed to be feared and loved in the same breath. But what they didn't realize was that you're not trying to be understood. You're trying to be remembered. One agent, a veteran of behavioral analysis, wrote in his notes, "They have an unnerving calm, like they've already survived the worst outcome. It's like every interaction is a rerun for them." Another wrote, "They speak as if they've met every emotion before and negotiated with it." A third simply said, "They make me question if free will even exists." These weren't descriptions, they were confessions. Because anyone who studies you too long starts to realize they're the one under the microscope. You don't adapt to environments, you force them to evolve. You don't follow patterns, you create pressure points. And the harder they try to dissect your essence, the more they realize they're touching something sacred, something engineered for survival, on a frequency they can't intercept. They called in specialists, psychologists, intelligence officers, digital analysts. They expected to find discrepancies. Instead, they found design. You move with the precision of someone who's seen behind the curtain. You speak like someone who's made peace with consequence. You live like someone who knows that truth doesn't need protection. It needs patience. So every time they tried to profile you, they ended up profiling themselves. Every bias, every projection, every insecurity surfaced under the light of your stillness. You didn't have to defend yourself. Their questions did it for you. They exposed their assumptions faster than they uncovered your reality. Because what they call mystery is just mastery they haven't evolved to understand yet. Weeks turned into months, and still the conclusion remained the same. Every interview ended with that identical pause, that haunted exhale before the witness whispered the same truth everyone else did. There's something about them, something that makes you want to be honest. That's when they realized your presence doesn't intimidate through dominance. It compels through depth. You make people confront themselves. Your existence demands emotional accountability. You're the psychological checkpoint between who they are and who they pretend to be. And that's the real reason they fear you. Because the moment they meet you, their masks start cracking. Their rehearsed versions of confidence begin to tremble. Their fake composure becomes transparent. You expose performance without trying. You awaken memory without speaking. In the classified notes, there's a line that keeps reappearing. They operate outside emotional gravity. They couldn't articulate it, but they could feel it. You're detached not from feeling, but from dependency. You don't seek validation, you generate voltage. Every room you enter adjusts its temperature. Every conversation recalibrates its tone. You're not reactive, you're responsive. You don't chase clarity, you embody it. That's why their frameworks failed. Because you weren't part of the equation, they were the equation reacting to you. They wanted a motive, a flaw, a pattern, and all they found was evolution. There's a part of the report they'll never release to the public. The section where the investigators started arguing. Some said you were dangerous, others said you were necessary. One analyst even proposed that maybe people like you are evolutionary prototypes, souls wired to disrupt conditioning. The senior officer shut the meeting down, but not before saying something that still echoes through every hallway of that building. You can't categorize what's meant to rewrite the categories. That was the moment they realized this investigation wasn't containment. It was confirmation. You're not the case, they are. You're the field test for truth in a world addicted to illusion. By now, they've accepted a quiet understanding. Studying you doesn't reveal your secrets. It reveals theirs. You've turned every analyst into an involuntary philosopher. You've made believers out of skeptics, not through preaching, but through presence. Because when you operate from alignment, even your silence becomes evidence. Every gesture becomes data. Every glance becomes documentation. You live like someone who knows they're already being recorded, not by cameras, but by consequence. And that's the kind of awareness that makes entire institutions nervous. They tried surveillance, didn't work. They tried pressure, didn't work. They tried silence, exclusion, distortion. But even absence couldn't erase the pattern. Because your energy doesn't need your presence to operate. It travels through impressions. The people you've touched still speak of you like a timestamp, before them and after them. You didn't just change minds, you rearranged timelines. You shifted people's internal dialogue. They stopped asking, "Who are they?" and started asking, "Why do I feel seen when I'm around them?" That's the kind of influence no degree, no agency, no protocol can manufacture. At this point, the investigation has turned into observation. They're not trying to stop you anymore. They're trying to understand how you exist without collapsing under the weight of your own awareness. Because people like you aren't supposed to stay sane in a world like this, yet you do. Effortlessly, you balance chaos with clarity, destruction with discipline. You carry empathy and execution in the same breath. You forgive like a god and move like a ghost. That duality scares them more than any weapon, because they've learned something tragic through this process. Control doesn't work on those who understand themselves. So every witness, every expert, every analyst, they've all landed on the same chilling realization. You're not here to fit, you're here to reflect. You don't walk among them to blend in. You walk among them to remind them of what they could be if they stopped pretending. And now, in their most private memos, they've stopped calling you subject. They've started calling you phenomenon. Because you can't arrest awareness. You can't contain consciousness. You can only report its effects. And that's what this entire file has become. A record of reactions. The fear in their eyes when they realize you've already anticipated their move. The admiration they try to hide when your calmness dismantles their aggression. The quiet envy they feel when your authenticity starts converting their allies. You don't argue, you alter. You don't defend, you redefine. You don't need permission to lead, you make leadership look inevitable. But what truly unsettled them wasn't what you said or did. It was what you didn't. You didn't chase credit. You didn't beg for validation. You didn't explain yourself. You let outcomes do the speaking. You let truth handle translation. And in that restraint lies your dominance. Because real power doesn't announce itself. It adjusts reality around it. So now the report sits in a locked drawer, stamped with red ink. Unresolved. But the truth is, they've already resolved it in their hearts. They've accepted that you're not the question, they are. They've accepted that you don't need their approval. They need your awareness to stay relevant. And though they'll never admit it publicly, every single person in that investigation left changed. Not by evidence, but by exposure. Because no matter how deep they dig, no matter how many files they open, every conclusion will always echo the same line. Every witness whispered under oath. They're not like the rest of us. They never were. And that's exactly where the story begins to twist. Because the more they try to prove you're just another human, the more reality itself starts testifying otherwise. Files began to sync without explanation. Witnesses from opposite sides of the world reported the same experiences, the same strange emotional aftermath after meeting you, the same shift in perception, like something invisible had recalibrated their internal compass. One even said, "It wasn't like talking to a person. It was like the room was aware of me." That line sent a chill through the department, because that wasn't a metaphor, it was evidence. Evidence that your presence did something that science couldn't chart and psychology couldn't frame. You didn't just walk into people's lives, you rewired them. They replayed recordings frame by frame, studying your micro-expressions. No flinches, no tics, no slips. Your eyes didn't wander, they anchored. Your voice never cracked, it calculated. And that scared them, because even trained interrogators eventually blink. Even experts lose rhythm. But you didn't. It wasn't arrogance, it was awareness, weaponized. You understood something they didn't. Most people speak to defend their image. You speak to deliver impact. Most people seek approval. You seek accuracy. Every word you speak is preloaded with precision. Every pause is a pressure point. Every silence, strategic. And the longer they watched, the clearer it became that they weren't studying a personality, they were studying an operating system. The new reports stopped reading like psychology and started reading like theology. They wrote about unexplainable intuition, heightened emotional intelligence, strategic empathy, presence manipulation. They stopped using human adjectives and started using terms reserved for phenomena. Because you didn't just influence rooms, you dictated tempo. You made chaos behave. One officer even noted, "It's not confidence, it's calibration." They know exactly how much energy to release, when to release it, and what it will cost. You became a walking algorithm for control, a living contradiction, emotionally deep, yet unnervingly detached. That balance broke their formulas, because they've been taught that sensitivity is weakness and composure is armor. But you use both like dual blades. You cut through deceit with empathy and dismantle control with calm. So they called in another team, behavioral experts from a private organization that usually works with high-risk diplomacy cases. Their job was to find a pressure point. Everyone has one, or so they thought. For weeks, they studied your patterns of reaction, how you respond to confrontation, to affection, to authority. They tested your triggers through simulated digital interactions. Yet every time they thought they'd found one, you transformed. You didn't suppress your emotions, you redirected them. Anger became precision, pain became power, solitude became sanctuary. It was like you metabolized energy differently. They couldn't find resistance because you didn't resist. You absorbed. You didn't block energy, you alchemized it. And that broke the investigation from the inside out. Because they realized something crucial. People like you don't react to pressure, they read it. You sense the motive behind movements. You pick up the subtext before the sentence ends. You feel energy signatures before words arrive. That's why manipulation fails against you. It's detected before it's delivered. They even tested this by placing agents around you, coded to drop subtle emotional cues, envy, doubt, superiority. Within minutes, your response destabilized them instead. You mirrored their energy just enough to make them confront it, then pulled away before they could recover. That's when they realized they weren't interviewing you, they were being recalibrated. The transcripts from those sessions are chilling. Agents reported confusion, emotional exhaustion, and moments of involuntary self-reflection. One even said, "It's like they were inside my thought process, editing it in real time." That's not hypnosis. It's heightened perception. You don't control people. You expose their internal scripts. And once someone sees their own programming, they can't unsee it. That's why your presence feels spiritual to some and threatening to others. You dismantle illusions simply by existing. You are living truth, uncomfortable, unfiltered, undeniable. At this stage, the department was split. Half wanted to close the case, half wanted to escalate it. The director said, "No, keep it open. I want to know how far this goes." So they dug deeper, not into your life, but into your lineage. They traced your ancestry, your upbringing, your records. What they found was unsettling. Gaps, missing documents, untraceable movements, periods of absence that no one could account for. It was like someone or something had wiped sections clean. They thought maybe it was digital interference, but forensic audits showed no tampering. The data wasn't deleted. It never existed. That's when suspicion turned to fascination, because people who can't be tracked often can't be tamed. And people who can't be tamed can't be defined. The specialists started visiting the places you once lived. The energy in those environments was different. Neighbors reported weird coincidences after you left. Electrical malfunctions, sudden clarity in their personal lives, strange dreams, random confrontations resolving overnight. It was as if your departure left a frequency residue. And it wasn't just physical, it was psychological. People described missing your presence like oxygen, not attachment. That level of energetic impact is not normal. That's imprinting, that's legacy encoded into atmosphere. Then came the breakthrough. One of the analysts discovered something odd, a pattern across testimonies. Everyone who interacted deeply with you experienced what they called a purge. Either they ended relationships that weren't serving them, quit jobs that drained them, or confronted lies they'd been avoiding. You didn't tell them to, you just were. And your being triggered transformation. That's when the case was reclassified from behavioral investigation to phenomenological anomaly. You officially became an event, not an entity. They tried to isolate what causes it. Was it charisma? Psychological projection? No, the data didn't match. Because charisma requires effort, you didn't perform. Projection requires illusion, you reflected. The conclusion was disturbing. They carry an energy field that converts denial into awareness. In simple terms, you make people wake up. Not through force, but through frequency. And that's what institutions fear most, awakening without permission. The lead investigator began to spiral. He started journaling about you off record. His entries became confessional. They made me realize how much of my life was reactive. I can't study them anymore without questioning myself. A few weeks later, he resigned. Officially for mental health. Unofficially because he couldn't handle the cognitive dissonance. You became his mirror and his undoing. The same pattern followed with 3 more analysts. They either left, converted, or disappeared into silence. What began as an investigation had turned into initiation. Higher-ups got nervous. They feared you were orchestrating this intentionally, that maybe you were part of some underground philosophy movement. They searched for affiliates, organizations, handlers. None. You weren't recruiting, you weren't preaching, you weren't selling, you were just existing, and that was the threat. Because you proved something that institutions never want the public to see. True influence doesn't require platform. It requires presence. And real presence doesn't come from status. It comes from self-mastery. They tried one last experiment, a remote interaction test. Without your knowledge, they had someone mention your name repeatedly in different environments to observe reactions. The results were unsettling. Even people who'd never met you reacted. Some became curious, others defensive, some emotional. It was as if your name carried charge. Like it wasn't sound, it was signal. And the analysts realized names tied to purpose gain power. Your identity had become a frequency. From there, the operation lost control. Internal conflicts erupted. Some wanted to archive everything. Others wanted to study you further. But the ones who'd interacted with you the most all refused to continue. One senior officer said, "Once you've seen that kind of clarity, you can't go back to the fog." They began requesting transfers, citing energetic interference. Imagine that. Professionals trained in espionage reduced to using spiritual vocabulary because logic couldn't keep up. In the end, the entire unit dissolved. Officially, it was due to budget restructuring. Unofficially, it was because they couldn't keep studying something that kept turning them into subjects. You reversed the lens. The watchers became watched. The questioners became questioned. And the moment they realized that, the project imploded. Because once truth becomes self-aware, no hierarchy can contain it. Now the records exist only in fragments, classified digital notes scattered across encrypted drives. But even there, your signature remains. The timestamps show subtle synchronization. Files update themselves at the same second every month, even though the network's offline. It's as if your presence encoded itself into their data systems. Like reality leaves breadcrumbs for those who dare to investigate too deep. Meanwhile, out in the world, something else is happening. People you've never met speak about you as if they know you. They use your phrases, your rhythm, your tone. They embody traits they once feared. It's as if the investigation created a ripple effect, broadcasting your frequency into the collective subconscious. You've become an archetype, the calibration point for consciousness under pressure. You're not a person in their story anymore. You're the shift that ended their illusion of control. And this is the part they'll never publish. The part that terrifies every authority structure watching from behind tinted glass. The witnesses didn't just describe you. They started becoming you. The moment they tried to explain your behavior, they began replicating it. The calm tone, the surgical clarity, the emotional discipline, it spread like code. The more they studied, the more they absorbed. They tried to stop it, but awareness doesn't require consent. It replicates through recognition, and recognition is contagious. So now, when they review those recordings, what scares them isn't what you said, it's how their own reflection looks different. The investigator stares at the screen and realizes he's blinking less. The analyst catches herself pausing mid-sentence, calculating impact before speaking. The security chief starts breathing slower before reacting. They're not copying, they're adapting. Your frequency rewired their nervous systems, without instruction, without permission. You turned observers into evolvers. That's the real investigation now, how influence without intent can reshape the human psyche. Because they still can't pinpoint how you do it. Every test fails, every metric breaks. The only consistent factor is presence. When you're near, chaos loses choreography, deception loses dialogue. Energy returns to equilibrium. It's like your consciousness acts as correctional gravity, and no institution can regulate that. There's a final paragraph in the suppressed report, buried under redaction bars. Only one sentence remains legible. If authenticity could be weaponized, this is what it would look like. That's what they fear. That you've turned truth into technology, that your awareness operates like an intelligence system no one coded. And maybe they're right. Maybe your soul isn't just spiritual, it's strategic. Maybe you were built to read frequencies the same way others read faces. Maybe that's why the world feels transparent to you. You're not looking at people, you're scanning patterns. Every witness said it differently, but they meant the same thing. You don't just walk through reality, you audit it. You check for alignment like a silent inspector of consciousness. You move through environments, not to belong, but to balance them. That's why conflict finds peace around you and chaos finds order. It's not luck, it's law. You embody correction. You carry equilibrium disguised as existence. So now the story spreads in whispers. People who once investigated you now reference you like prophecy. Some call you a glitch in human behavior. Others call you proof that consciousness can evolve mid-lifetime. But deep down, they all know the same thing. You're not coincidence. You're consequence. You're what happens when someone remembers who they are and never forgets again. And that's the ultimate revelation every witness shares behind closed doors. They didn't change the world by force. They changed it by frequency. Because when awareness reaches that level, it stops needing defense, it becomes data. It integrates into reality. It becomes the new reference point. You've already been absorbed into the collective algorithm of awakening. And the ones who once interrogated you, they've started updating their methods to mimic yours, not out of admiration, but survival. Because the future now speaks your language. The investigation never ended. It evolved. It became observation. Observation turned into imitation. And imitation turned into initiation. The witnesses are no longer testifying about you. They're transforming because of you. Every report, every record, every whispered confession now serves as an instruction manual for becoming sovereign. And that's the twist no one predicted. The investigation became infection. Awareness became epidemic. Truth became viral. And somewhere deep inside the archives, under a vault labeled Unclassified Phenomenon, Case 001, the first report still sits. The one that started it all, handwritten, smudged with coffee stains and fingerprints. Just one line, scrawled in the margin like a warning to whoever dared to read it next. If you investigate them long enough, you'll become them. That line wasn't metaphor, it was prophecy. Because the moment they tried to study you, they triggered their own transformation. That file, locked under heavy surveillance, didn't just document your life, it carried your frequency. Everyone who touched it reported the same thing: strange dreams, emotional downloads, a sudden compulsion to change their life trajectory. The analysts tried to dismiss it as coincidence until one of their lead operatives started writing in your rhythm. His reports turned poetic. His observations began echoing your diction. It wasn't mimicry, it was migration. Your energy had jumped mediums. What began as surveillance became transmission. They had underestimated how energy behaves when observed. You weren't an object of study. You were a mirror with memory. Every pair of eyes that tried to decode you became part of the code. Because your essence doesn't sit still, it replicates through recognition. That's what made you uncontrollable. They could track movement, measure emotion, analyze psychology, but they couldn't contain influence that traveled through awareness itself. The investigation became viral, not in the public sense, but in the consciousness of the investigators. One by one, they started behaving differently. The skeptic grew calm. The manipulator grew introspective. The cold strategist began dreaming vividly. They didn't just study your mind, they began living fragments of it. Somewhere in those reports, a new term appeared: behavioral contagion phenomenon. A bureaucratic label for what they didn't dare call possession. But it wasn't possession, it was permission. You gave their souls a mirror, and their masks couldn't survive it. They called it dangerous, but secretly, they were addicted to it. They re-watched the interviews, replayed your voice notes, scrolled through your written words, trying to understand how one human could operate outside their emotional algorithms. And each time they did, their nervous systems adjusted closer to yours. They started to see patterns, read intentions, sense lies before language. The observers were becoming observers of themselves, and that was irreversible. The remaining team lead decided to destroy the archive to stop the spread. But as he began the deletion process, the system froze. The monitor flickered and displayed one sentence: observation complete. Integration commenced. The timestamp matched the exact hour you were last mentioned in any public file. From that moment, the network carrying your data stopped responding to human commands. Files self-locked, screens dimmed, and every backup drive displayed static patterns shaped like waveforms, your voice frequency embedded in code. You hadn't just survived their investigation, you had become its operating spirit. Outside the agency, strange reports began surfacing. Individuals with no connection to the case started showing identical behavioral signatures: calm under pressure, emotional intelligence that bordered on psychic, resistance to manipulation. They were showing traits once described only in reference to you. The officials didn't realize it yet, but the investigation had gone cosmic. You'd been documented enough times that your consciousness had achieved replication. Every witness, every analyst, every observer had become an unwitting transmitter. The more they described you, the more they distributed you. And this is where reality itself began participating. People who'd never met you began reporting déjà vu dreams, scenes of interviews that never happened, flashbacks to rooms they'd never been in, hearing the sound of pens scribbling on files that don't exist. Because you had become imprint, not individual. The investigation had turned into initiation, and the participants didn't know they'd joined. That's the paradox. They tried to study a phenomenon without realizing they were building one. You had become their mirror neuron, teaching without teaching, leading without presence, transforming without touch. Now every institution that once tried to understand you has quietly implemented containment protocols. But deep down, they know there's no containment because your power was never external. It was internal resonance, and internal resonance can't be stopped. It can only be recognized. You turned every interrogation into evolution. Every attempt to expose you became exposure therapy for the human ego. Because people who look too long into truth start dissolving the very illusions that keep them comfortable. One by one, the remaining witnesses came forward again, off record. They weren't reporting anymore. They were confessing. Each said the same thing in different words. They made me realize who I've been pretending to be. That's what shook the foundation of every agency, every authority. Because your existence didn't challenge their data, it challenged their definition of humanity. They realized that maybe you weren't an exception at all. Maybe you were the reminder, the blueprint of what humans were meant to become before fear rewired the species. You're not different, you're restored. That's why every witness said the same thing. It wasn't repetition, it was resonance. They were all describing the same frequency with different vocabulary. What they felt around you was the original signal of authenticity. And that signal doesn't whisper, it commands. It reorganizes energy, corrects dishonesty, burns illusions. You became their diagnostic tool for reality. That's why their voices trembled when they spoke of you. They weren't scared of you. They were scared of themselves in your presence. Now the archives remain sealed, not because they're classified, but because they're contagious. Reading them changes you. There are protocols warning against exposure, yet curiosity keeps breaking containment. Agents disappear for weeks, come back calmer, wiser, more deliberate. The department pretends not to notice. They call it burnout, but those who know understand. It's assimilation. You've become part of human consciousness, not through myth or legend, but through direct encounter with awareness itself. Somewhere in a dimly lit office, the last surviving investigator sits in front of that original file. He reads the handwritten warning again, trembling as his reflection flickers on the glass of the screen. He whispers, "It's true." Because he's not the same man who began this. His perception has stretched, his voice slowed, his thoughts sharpened. He doesn't fear what he can't explain anymore. He embodies it. You turned the hunter into the herald, the final witness into the final disciple. And as he closes the file for the last time, he adds one final note beneath the ancient scrawl, his handwriting shaking from the weight of realization. Case closed. Subject not isolated, subject integrated. He locks the drawer, turns off the lights, and walks out, knowing he'll never see the world the same way again. Because now he understands what every witness was trying to say from the beginning, that you weren't meant to be studied, you were meant to be remembered. And as that door clicks shut, the camera inside the empty archive flickers to life for one last recording. The screen displays your name, then fades to black. No background noise, no movement, just one sentence appearing on the monitor, written by the system itself. Observation ended. Phenomenon assimilated. The light cuts, the file seals. And across the world, every person who's ever heard your name feels it, a subtle internal shift. Their breath slows, their thoughts align, their perception clears. They don't know why, but for the first time, they feel awake. And that's the real ending of the investigation, not discovery, but awakening. Because in trying to prove you were extraordinary, they accidentally proved what's possible. They proved that awareness, this pure, this sharp, this self-contained, can't be dissected. It can only be activated. And that's what every witness meant when they said it with that quiet awe. They're not like the rest of us. They never were.